Hi, I'm Nasrin, the designer behind Needle-Eye Patterns, and this is a sewing tutorial for my latest design, the Amalfi Shirt. Find the pattern at needleeyepatterns.com. The link is in the description, and if you need help printing and assembling the pattern, watch this video. I'm using 100% linen fabric for this project, but you can basically use any lightweight shirting fabric that you like. You also need a lightweight, fusible interfacing. And I always recommend getting woven interfacing because it's more durable and also easier to use. 9 buttons that are 7mm wide. And I will actually cover them with matching fabric, and you can watch that at the end of this video. Fusible fabric tape. We will use this to stabilize the neckline and the armhole. But if you don't have it, that's totally fine. You can make some strips of interfacing and use those ones instead. Pins, ruler, some scissors, and a fabric marker or a tailor's chalk. Let's go through the pattern pieces together to make sure you print and cut them all. Cuff, collar, the placket, the fusing for the placket, the front piece that you're gonna cut it on the fold on the fabric, sleeve, and the back that you're gonna also cut that on the fold. Do not forget to cut the notches for this project. They come very handy and we're going to use them a lot. Cut 2 layers of the fusing for cuff, 1 layer for the collar, and 1 layer for the placket. Let's start with fusing the fabric. Fold the placket in half, bad side touching bad side, and press the middle. Then place the fusing on the bad side and line up one edge of the fusing with the center line on the placket and press. Then on the good side, mark the seam allowance, which is 1.5 cm or 5/8 inch. Then fold the fabric on that line and press. Fuse 1 layer of the collar and 2 layers of the cuffs. For the front piece, keep the fabric folded first and notch the center of the neckline. Then open it up, bad side facing up, and measure from the center going down 8 inches and mark. Then cut a piece of your tape the same length and fuse it on. Do not hold the iron too long on these fusible tapes because they melt very fast. Then again, from the center, measure 7.5 inches and draw a straight line going down. Then square to that line, draw 2 short lines for 1.5 cm or 5/8 inch from each side. Then from the center going up, measure another 1.5 cm and mark. Connect these points together. Now start cutting right on the line, starting from the top, going down, but stop right at the first marking. Then from that point, cut towards the next points. But be careful not to pass those little points. Now we can go ahead and tape around the neckline and the armhole. And do this also for the back piece. In order to make the sewing for the placket more precise, you can also draw your sewing lines on the fabric. These lines are 1.5 cm or 5/8 inch away from these cutting lines that you created. Now grab both sides and pull them apart to get this line straight. Then pin the fabric in place. Flip the fabric to the bad side, fold the placket in half, and notch the center. Then line up the center with the center of the cut line, basically that little triangle that you created, and pin. Good side of the placket is touching bad side of the shirt. Try to line up the fabrics perfectly and pin. Now go ahead and sew right at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, or basically on that line that you created. Now, if you like to use a trim for around the placket and around the collar, we need it at this step. If you like to learn how to make these fringe trims, watch this video. I showed you there how to prepare your fabric and make these trims. Line up the center with the little triangle on the shirt and sew a straight line at 5/8 of an inch. Basically, you can stitch right on the seam that you created for the placket. Now push the seam allowances towards the placket and press. Then flip to the good side, fold the placket in half and press. Then fold the seam allowance and line it up right at the stitch line and press. Pin it down and sew very close to the fold. Now this is the little tricky part. On the bad side of the fabric, fold down one side of the shirt. Make sure it's exactly 90 degrees. Then give it a press. Now fold one corner over the other corner. Make sure both sides of the placket are lined up together and give it a press. Pin it down. Then flip the fabric. Fix the trim a little bit. Now, without catching the shirt, you need to stitch a short line on the placket. After that, we're gonna flip the shirt, and you see this little triangle? You're gonna stitch on that one too, without catching the shirt. Stitch right at the ditch. Now, if the placket is poking out from the neckline, you can trim that. Now let's sew the shoulders. We're gonna finish the shoulder seams and the side seams with French seam. So in order to do that, line up the front on the back, bad side touching bad side, and sew it at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which is 1/2 centimeter. Then press the seams towards one side. Now flip to the bad side. Poke the seam out. pin. And this time we're going to sew at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Push the seam towards the back, press it with the iron. I have this little vintage looking iron that I use it after I press the fabric with the hot iron. It helps the fabric to cool down and it creates a nice crease line on the fabric. I really recommend using this technique, and I'm sure you can find these little irons anywhere in the vintage stores. For the collar, grab the fused one and stitch the bottom at 1 centimeter or 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is basically a basting stitch. You can switch the stitch line to the longest one and just baste it. We're going to use this line to create a fold. On the other collar piece, place the trim on the good side of the fabric, starting just above the seam allowance. Line up the edges and pin. Now go ahead and sew at 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. When you're sewing a curve, you can lower the stitch length to the smallest, and this way you can easily turn the fabric slowly as you're stitching, and you're going to end up with a nicer curve. There is a notch at the center of the collar at the bottom. Place that notch on the center neckline at the back. Good side of the collar touching bad side of the back. Pin. Then the other notches on the collar will be lined up with the shoulder seams. Then keep pinning from both sides all the way to the center front. And the collar meant to be poking out from the center front because this is the seam allowance. Then sew around the neck at 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. When you're sewing the collar, it's very common that you're going to end up with a pucker. You don't need to seam rip the whole thing. You can just seam rip few centimeters around the pucker, pin it back, then start backstitching over the seam and finish and backstitch on the other side over the seam. Now flip the collar up along with the seams, press it, then grab the other collar, place it on top, good side touching good side. Keep the seam allowances folded as they are, line up the edges and pin. Start sewing right beside the placket, going around, but make sure not to catch the placket. Again, at the curves, you can lower the stitch length and sew slowly. and finish right beside the placket on the other side. Now trim the seam allowance to half. Flip the collar. Now line up the fold right at the stitch line and pin. Go ahead and stitch very close to the fold. Now go ahead and do a French seam for the side seams. If you're enjoying this video, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Let's sew a whole wardrobe together. Sleeves. If you're using a fabric that the good side and bad side looks the same, like the one I'm using, first place the sleeves on the table, bad side facing up. Make sure the notches are mirroring each other. Then fold them in half, bad side touching bad side. Line up the side seams and pin. Make sure you have the notch at the side seam of the sleeve marked. Now, right on that notch, measure 1.5 centimeters going in. Then you're gonna start sewing from the top, going down. And then you're gonna stop 2 centimeters before the mark, then lift the presser foot, turn the fabric a little bit, and then sew a diagonal line towards the end of that mark. Basically, what we want to do here is creating a slit the same time that we are creating a French seam for the side of the sleeves. Now, cut on that little line that you marked, but be careful not to pass the stitching. Also, you have to clip this corner. Now press the seam open. Flip the sleeve to the bad side. Poke the corner out. Press the seam again. And so add 1 centimeter seam allowance and stop right at the marking. Now to finish the slit, fold the top corner first and press. Then fold the slit in half and press it. Then roll the fabric again and pin. So very close to the edge. Now at the bottom of the sleeve, we want to create a basting stitch 1/2 centimeter above the edge. Again, make your stitch length to the biggest, backstitch at the beginning, but do not backstitch at the end. Keep a long tail for the thread. Then create a second stitching a few millimeters above the first one, backstitch at the beginning, but do not backstitch at the end. Now pull the tail of the thread gently and create gathering for the cuff. Let's work on the cuffs. Place the trim on the good side. Make sure the trim is not covering the seam allowances from the sides. And also make sure you're placing the trim at the narrower side of the cuff. Pin, and we're gonna sew this at 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Also, on the other layer of the cuff that is fused, we are going to make a stitch line at 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. That again, we're going to use this for folding the seam allowance later. Now, good side touching good side, line up the narrower side, pin, and sew at 5/8. Press the seams open. Also, press this seam allowance for the fused layer of the cuff. Now fold it in half. Pin the sides and keep the seam allowances folded. Clip the corners, make sure you're not cutting the stitch lines. Now flip to the good side. Poke the corners. You can also use a pin to gently pull the corners out. Now we want to attach the cuff to the sleeve. So make sure the gathering that you created at the sleeve is the same width as the cuff. Fold the cuff in half and mark the center. Same for the sleeve. Line up good side of the cuff with the bad side of the sleeve. Pin from one corner to the other corner. Go ahead and sew at 1.5 centimeters seam allowance without catching the other layer of the cuff. So basically only catching one layer at this time. Push the seams towards the cuff. You can also, as you're pressing, pull the fabric from each side to get the seam very flat and give it a press with the iron. Now line up the folded edge with the stitch line, pin, and sew very close to the fold. At the top of the sleeve, from the front notch to the back notch, we are creating a basting stitch, 0.5 centimeter below the edge. And this time we are not doing the back stitch at the beginning nor the end. Just keep a long tail for the thread. Let's sew the armholes with French seam. Flip the shirt to the good side. And the sleeve to the bad side. Remember, the double notch on the sleeve indicates the back and the single notch is for the front. Place the sleeve in the armhole. Start with lining up the side seams. You can fold the seam allowances opposite way and pin. Then line up the top notch on the sleeve with the shoulder seam. Then line up the notches on the sleeve for the back and front with the armhole. Double notches together and single notches together. As you can see, the sleeve is a little bit bigger than the armhole, which we have to ease it in to the armhole. You're gonna pull those loose threads that are for the basting stitch very gently and ease in the sleeve to the armhole. Just make sure to spread the gathering evenly between the two notches on each side and make sure they're not bunching at one spot. Now sew all around at 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Fold the seams to one side and press. Then push the sleeve in. Poke the seams out and press. Now sew at 1 centimeter seam allowance. We are going to finish the hem with double roll stitching. First, baste stitch at 1/2 centimeter above the hem, fold and press on this line. Now you're gonna fold the fabric again, the same size, and press. Now go ahead and stitch very close to the edge. Create the buttonholes starting 1/2 centimeter away from the edge on the sleeve back. And my tip for opening the buttonholes is place a pin at the end of the buttonhole, then using a seam ripper, start opening the middle, and that pin stops you from ripping the fabric by accident. Now the buttons. If you like to cover them with your matching fabric, you have to copy them on the fabric. Then cut it around with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now stitch around the edge. Pull the thread a little bit, then place the button in the middle, catch the hole of the button, and pull the thread. You can go through the hole of the button again and repeat this couple times, but do not cut the thread yet. Find the placement of the buttons on the cuff and using the same thread, stitch the button on. And done. Hope you like this design, and if you like to make the shorts that I'm wearing with this blouse, subscribe to my channel because that's the next tutorial coming up. I'll see you there.